Hey, folks, welcome to the pre-show where we just take our time for 3 minutes to get things a little set up. And I think I'm already set up. So there you go. I'm ready to roll. We got 3 minutes before we go live on air on the radio station, as always. And so what's going on? What's everybody doing tonight? How you doing? Welcome to the program. Well, when the program starts. So I've just been working all day, working away, and getting this show ready, and we'll take it from there. Now, we have not set up the new chat room yet. I have not had a chance to do that yet. And so once, they say when it rains, it pours. So I've been so busy the last week with work in that I haven't really had the opportunity to get that new chat room set up yet. So I've got to get to it, and we'll get it going so everybody can enjoy chatting again. That's all right now. It's just it's just not the same kind of chat room. So we're going to change it. We're going to put it back to what it was. We got about 1 minute and 20 seconds and we go live on air. And so everybody, you stand by with me here. Let me get my lights a little better than that. What is shining on there? Is it that? Hold on. This is part of the setup. StreamYard. It's that. I don't know why that's so bright. Or it's my computer. It could be my computer screen. No, it ain't. Thought it was this. No, yeah, it is to a certain extent. There we go. All right. We just need a little tiny bit of that. And we got about 30 seconds and we go live on the radio station. So everybody get prepared because we're going to roll here in just a minute. Hang on. StreamYard 44. We're going to go dark in a few seconds. So you all just sit tight. We'll be right back with the program.
Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, hey, folks, happy Wednesday evening. Welcome to the program. I am your host, Scotty Roberts, of this here, my show, the Intrepid radio program, found right here on Odyssey Radio. You can go to the odysseyradio.com website, and you can see this show and check out all the other shows that are in our lineup over there at Odyssey Radio. And it's Subspace Odyssey Radio. It's a merging of two, but you can just go to Odyssey Radio. And Odyssey is spelled oddly, ODYSY radio.com. So you can go on over and hear the audio version of this show if you're not there already. And also you can come on over to my Patreon page to see the video simulcast of this show. And that's over at my Patreon. You just go to patreon.com/Scotty Roberts. And if you want to see archives of this show, you can go over to my YouTube page. That's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. And you're going to see about 1,000 episodes of this show over there on YouTube. And the show that we're doing tonight, it'll be about 3 weeks, and you will see it in the archives over on YouTube. So if you don't want to participate in the live show, you can catch it 3 weeks later over in the archive over on my YouTube channel. But of course, there's not going to be a chat room with it because it's a different kind of chat room. We don't do the chat room through YouTube anymore. So it'll just be watching the show if that's what you'd like to do. And I encourage you, if you like this show, to come on over, join my Patreon page. And that's Patreon, Patreon.com, and Scotty Roberts. And you find us and go ahead and become a patron of this channel. You'll see all of these shows live as they're happening, and plus many other extras. So I want to thank you for being here. Thank you in advance for being here. And once we build this Patreon up a bit and we start getting a little revenue rolling in, we'll be able to do some other things with this show as well. We're already planning to do some ghost investigations, paranormal investigations, if you will, and putting those on film and doing some live events like that. And I've also got some book giveaways coming up, so for some of my books. And so I want to encourage you to come on over, spread it around to your friends, let them know that this is here. And I got to put on my cheaters because I'm looking at my page, and I've been staring at my computer so much today doing work that now that it's come showtime, I got to throw my glasses on so I can see what the heck I'm doing over here. So everything gets a little fuzzy. So I just want to see who's over here so far. So there tonight, I want to jump right into this because I think this is an interesting topic. I've entitled it tonight, Woman of Flames. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go into the show tonight, because I want you to get a perspective of this woman we're going to be talking about that you may not have had before, if you even had one before. And what I have found interesting and what I like doing with biblical history, when I start getting into Bible history, I get in there to try to find the things that we've missed or the new research that has come up. There is something about the way that I like to study the Bible is that I'm intrigued by things that are different than the norm, because I think we get so locked into a faith mode of accepting what's been said, what's been written, what's been done, that we forget that there are other elements to that story that might take it out of a faith realm. Now, what am I saying by that? I'm saying that sometimes it looks very much like what you find in biblical writ or in scripture. You find that there are people that are taken at face value and they become Bible stories, become bathrobes and bed sheets and beards and sandals, that kind of fare. And they become only stories of faith. Is that how would I explain this the best way? If you aren't already catching my drift, is that I've grown tired of just the faith stories, especially once I found out that those faith stories have more elements to them than we were told because we didn't always know. New research uncovers this. There's more things to understand. Anthropology, anthropological studies, archaeological studies. There are many archaeological studies that support the history of the Bible. I'm not questioning the historicity of the Bible or the efficacy of the history that's there. But sometimes when we hear somebody either preaching a sermon or giving a homily or teaching a lesson about the Bible, that it is so steeped in faith speak that we forget to look at the science speak and that's what anthropology and archaeology is. So I've already said it, but I'll be redundant by saying the anthropological speak, the people speak, the things that scream from those stories of being, number one, either real stories wrapped around a historical event, or they become faith stories where nobody can question what was done. They become faith stories that look like other faiths and other religions that have their faith stories around their stories. There's interpretations. And what it comes down to is, what are you going to be able to understand about a story if you house it completely in one faith and you don't expand it to be something, to understand it from a different angle. And it's like the series I did on David, where the title of the series I took from a book that I had read, King David, the real life story of an invented hero. Now, how can that be? How can those two things, that sounds like a paradox. How can you juxtapose those two things against each other and have anything that makes sense? Well, David, we found through that study, is a real guy. There's no reason to doubt the historicity of David. There is no reason to doubt that he was a real man, a real king of Israel. There is too much history around him that lets you know that it is so, that he was a real guy. However, the big story I found was that the stories that we know of King David, the most familiar ones, everything from David and Goliath to all the other events, Bathsheba, his affair with Bathsheba, and all of those things that are stories that we have heard over and over again, and we don't question them because they've become part of our Bible, our liturgy, if you will, our literature in Bible study. And we go with these stories without really knowing more meat that is on the bone that might be missing. And so when I look at David, you find that there's stories about him that we accepted for many, many centuries until you find out and you start reading and comparing and looking at things and finding out that the books that we found about David the king, the books of Samuel, most of what you find in Samuel about David is written in a form of ancient apologetic. Now, what's an apologetic? That's where you write something to defend something. And this is the way these things were written about every Middle Eastern monarch of the day. Back in David's time, prior to David's time, after David's time, they were apologetics. They made the king and his deeds look better than they were in order to build up the fame of the king or the acceptance of the king, or for history to understand that this was an amazing king, an amazing man. And then they take the bad points about him or his enemies, and they make them even more dire enemies than they were in real life. They make those enemies dastardly and evil, especially in the biblical story of David, make King Saul the most evil man to come down the pike. But this is what apologetic does. Makes the bad look bad and the good look better. And even when they're bad, they make them look good. And so when I did that study on King David, this is what drives me when I do biblical study these days, is not so much that I can't just take the tried and true story and say, and accept it, that there's something good here. There's a good story here. It's worth telling. But I like to look at those stories and find out, is there more to it? Is there something we're missing? And sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with upending a faith story or anything like that, but has to do with understanding history, understanding historical context, understanding anthropology. Like with David, a couple of things I found in studying David, and some of these are speculative, but it goes along with the text, because while you have the story of David in the books of Samuel, you can go to the books of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and find that there are different stories about David, or different versions of the same story. And you have to ask yourself, well, what was the true story here? So one of the things that stood out for me, and this is all in prepping for what we're going to talk about tonight with Deborah, is David. He was the giant slayer, David and Goliath. We all know that story. Yet you go to the book of Kings, one of the books of Kings. I don't have the reference in my head. I didn't know I was going to mention this tonight, so I didn't write it down. But there's a story that talks about all the deeds of David's mighty men. And there was a man named, now I can't think of his name even off the top of my head, but he was one of David's mighty men. And it said he slew the giant Goliath, who had the spear that was like a weaver's staff and the weight of it and all that. And it's just a little mention, little tiny verse. And I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But it says in the books of Samuel that David slew Goliath. But then it says over in Kings that this man who was one of David's mighty men was the guy who slew Goliath. Which story is true? And so you have to look at the rest of the story in Samuel and find out what's apologetic versus what is true story. And there were lots of things about David that were written apologetically to build up his deeds, build up his goodness, make him look incredible while making his enemies look horrible, and all to write a story of David for history that would make him look good. And yet, as this author of this book on King David that I read and based some of my study on, he is the head of Hebrew studies at Yale University. And he said, at the end of the book, he concluded, David is probably a man that none of us would really like very well because he wasn't a likable guy. The Bible builds up things about him, but he wasn't a likable man. We always wondered why King Saul went after him so hard. Well, King Saul was mad. He was going insane, according to the scriptural story in Samuel. Yet we find that David also ran off with Saul's wife. David had been anointed the next king by the prophet. David had then worked under Saul as one of his, is the captain of his bodyguard. He was in the palace all the time. He had sex with Saul's wife. And then when Saul finds this out, he's going to kill him, because back in the Middle Eastern way of doing things, when you're talking about Middle Eastern monarchs, to have had sex with the king's wife was death, because that was showing the weakness of the king, that you could take over his wife from him. And this is what the story didn't tell you in Samuel, but tells you in other books. And so when David left because Saul was after him, trying to kill him, it says he took Saul's wife with him. And there's a whole story there, which I'm not going to get into. All of this to say, those two things I mentioned about David is to point out the fact that there are apologetics even in Scripture. Now, does that take away the salvific nature of Scripture, that this is the Word of God, that God wants you to know something? No, not necessarily. What it does do, though, is show us that perhaps some of these things are just like every other religion, every other bit of history that's out there. And this is what I like to do when I look at these stories. So tonight, I'm talking about a woman that I've entitled this, and I've called her by a literal translation of her title, of her marriage title, Woman of Flames. And the prophetess and judge Deborah, or Deborah, we would say in Western world, she held court beneath the palm tree between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And she was the only female judge of Israel. And what was a judge of Israel? The judges were like monarchs, but they weren't a monarchy. Where King Saul, right before David, was the first king of Israel. Prior to him, they had a series of judges for like 400 years, I believe it was, that they raised up. The prophet would raise up a new judge, or somebody would become a leader in the land. This is the kind of person that Deborah was. And now I want to read this account of her in the Bible, because I think it's very interesting. It's a short story, and so I want to read this for you. And it goes like this. This is Judges chapter 4. And I've taken it from The Message, which is a translation of Scripture into modern idiom. It's not a reinterpretation of the events. It's a translation of the words into more modern English. goes like this. The people of Israel kept right on doing evil in God's sight. When with Ehud dead, Ehud was a judge, God sold them off to Jabin, the king of Canaan, who ruled from Hatzor. Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim, was the commander of his army. And the people of Israel cried out to God because he had cruelly oppressed them with his 900 iron chariots for 20 years. Deborah was a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth. She was judge over Israel at that time. She held court under Deborah's palm between Ramah and Bethel in the hills of Ephraim. The people of Israel went to her in matters of justice. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "It's become clear that God, the God of Israel, commands you, go to Mount Tabor and prepare for battle. Take 10 companies of soldiers from Naphtali and Zebulun, and take care of getting Sisera, the leader of Jabin's army, to the Kishon River with all his chariots and troops, and I'll make sure you win the battle." This is the prophecy from God. And Barak said, "If you go with me, I'll go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go." Now, this is like many of these guys, they wanted the prophets to go with them when they went into battle. So Deborah answered him and said, "Of course I'll go with you, but understand that with an attitude like that, there'll be no glory in it for you. God will use a woman's hand to take care of Sisera, the general of Jabin." And so Deborah got ready and went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali together at Kadesh. 10 companies of men followed him, and Deborah was with him. And it happened that Heber, the Kenite, had parted company with the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, the Moses-in-law, and he was now living at Zananim Oak near Kadesh. And they told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. Sisera immediately called up his chariots to the Kishon River, 900 chariots, along with all his troops who were with him at Harosheth Hagoyim. Deborah said to Barak, "Charge! This very day, God has given you victory over Sisera. Isn't God marching before you?" And Barak charged down the slopes of Mount Tabor, his 10 companies following him. These companies were supposed to be of 1,000 men each. So you're talking 10,000 soldiers. It's like something out of Lord of the Rings when "Watch for me on the 5th day," says Gandalf. And they come charging down the mountainside into the battle. And so Barak charged down the slopes of Mount Tabor with his 10 companies following him. God routed Sisera, all those chariots, all those troops before Barak. Sisera jumped out of his chariot and ran. Barak chased the chariots and troops all the way to Harosheth Hagoyim, and Sisera's entire fighting force was killed, not one man left alive. Meanwhile, Sisera, the general, running for his life, headed for the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite. And Jabin, king of Hatzor, and Heber the Kenite were on good terms with one another. Jael stepped out to meet Sisera and said, "Come in, sir, stay here with me, don't be afraid." So he went with her into her tent. She covered him with a blanket. He said to her, "Please, a little water, I'm thirsty." She opened a bottle of milk and gave him a drink and then covered him up again. He then said, "Stand at the tent flap. If anyone comes by and asks you, 'Is there anyone here?' tell him, 'No, not a soul.'" Then when he was fast asleep from exhaustion, Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent peg and a hammer, tiptoed toward Sisera, and drove the tent peg through his temple and all the way down into the ground. He convulsed and died. Barak arrived in pursuit of Sisera. Jael went out to greet him. She said, "Come, I'll show you the man you're looking for." And he went with her, and there he was, Sisera, stretched out, dead, with a tent peg through his temple. On that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the people of Israel. The people of Israel pressed harder and harder on Jabin, king of Canaan, until there was nothing left of him. And thus ends the story of Deborah the judge. And I don't think it even picks it up in the next chapter at all. Because that's all I know, by the way. I'm going to take a look in Judges 5. Oh, there's the song of Deborah and Barak. Let's see what time we got. 9:25. Let's read some of this. That day, this is now Judges 5, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang this song. When they let down their hair in Israel, they let it blow wild in the wind. The people volunteered with abandon, bless God. Hear, O kings, listen, O princes, to God, yes, to God, I'll sing. Make music to God, to the God of Israel. God, when you left Seir, marched across the fields of Edom, earth quaked. Yes, the skies poured rain. Oh, the clouds made rivers. Mountains leapt before God, the Sinai God, before God, the God of Israel. In the time of Shamgar, son of Anath, and in the time of Jael, public roads were abandoned. Travelers went by back roads. Warriors became fat and sloppy. No fight left in them. Then you, Deborah, rose up. You got up, a mother in Israel. God chose new leaders who then fought at the gates, and not a shield or spear to be seen among the 40 companies of Israel. Lift your hearts high, O Israel, with abandon, volunteering yourselves with the people. Bless God. You who ride on prized donkeys, comfortably mounted on blankets, and you who walk down the roads, ponder, attend. Gather at the town well and listen to them sing, chanting the tale of God's victories. His victories accomplished in Israel. Then the people of God went down to the city gates. Wake up, Deborah. Wake up, sing a song. On your feet, Barak. Take your prisoners, son of Abinoam. Then the remnant went down to greet the brave ones. The people of God joined the mighty ones. The captains from Ephraim came to the valley behind you. Benjamin with your troops. Captains marched down from Machir. From Zebulun high, ranking leaders came down. Issachar's princes rallied to Deborah. Issachar stood fast with Barak, backing him up on the field of battle. But in Reuben's divisions there was much second guessing. Why all those campfire discussions, diverted and distracted? Reuben's visions couldn't make up their minds. Gilead played it safe across the Jordan. And Dan, why did he go off sailing? Asher kept his distance on the seacoast, safe and secure in his harbor. But Zebulun risked his life and limb, defied death, as did Naphtali on the battle heights. Now, by the way, you're getting an historical accounting of what happened in this battle and the gathering of troops to fight for Israel. The kings came, they fought. The kings of Canaan fought. At Tanakh they fought. At Megiddo's brook, but they took no silver, no plunder. The stars in the sky joined the fight. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrent, Kishon, swept them away. The torrent attacked them, the torrent, Kishon. Oh, you'll stomp on the necks of the strong. Then the hooves of the horses pounded, charging, stampeding stallions. Curse Miraz, says God's angel. Double curse its people, because they didn't come when God needed them, didn't rally to God's side with valiant fighters. Most blessed of all women, they're calling her blessed, Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of homemaking women. He asked for water, she brought milk. In a handsome bowl, she offered cream. She grabbed a tent peg in her left hand, and with her right hand she seized a hammer. She hammered Sisera. She smashed his head. She drove a hole in his temple. She slumped at her feet. He slumped at her feet. He fell. He sprawled. He slumped at her feet. He fell. Slumped, fallen, dead. Remember, this is a song that they're singing. Sisera's mother waited at the window, a weary, anxious watch. What's keeping his chariot? What delays his chariot's rumble? The wisest of her ladies in waiting's answer, with calm, reassuring words, don't you think they're busy at plunder, dividing up the loot? A girl, maybe 2 girls, for each man. And for Sisera, a bright silk shirt, a prize fancy silk shirt, and a colorful scarf. Make it 2 scarves to grace the neck of the plunderer. Thus may all God's enemies perish, while his lovers be like the unclouded sun. The land was quiet for 40 years. And that ends the song and the account of Deborah. Then it goes into Gideon, and you know all about Gideon and the fleece, and that's the next judge in Israel. So I found this to be a very neat passage to read. What's it doing? It's giving us an account of a battle, of the king and the general and his armies that had oppressed Israel for 20 years. And that makes this an incredibly interesting story. Yeah, Barbie D, I just saw your comment. David was no saint. They call him in the Bible the sweet psalmist of Israel, the man after God's own heart. And he may have been those things. He may have had his faith. But I think he was a murderer many times over, sometimes arranging the murders of his own sons, who he thought were going to rebel against him. He did some pretty dastardly things. We may have to hit some of that stuff again one of these days. But David is still a mighty warrior, a mighty man, a hero in the faith stories, a hero in Israel, a hero to the Jews. But there was more to his story than that. Now, I'm going to go to more of the story of Deborah. And I think this is very interesting. This is a woman who was a prophet, or a prophetess, if you will, in Israel. She was a judge of Israel. She was someone who was powerful. She was someone who was very strong. If you want to get a good emancipated woman's story, or the liberated woman, or a good what's the better word to use for it? A feminist story from the book of Bible. You couldn't find a better one than Deborah. She was a ruler in Israel before the time of the kings. She was a prophetess. She was the one who would judge the people. And you remember in this Judges passage, it talked about where she did her thing. And I've got a couple of different things. I got a really long dissertation here I wanted to go through, which we're not going to hit any of that hardly tonight, but we'll get there eventually. But there was also, remember it says here, where is it here? I'm back in Gideon. I need to go back to Judges 4. It says at the beginning of Judges 4, it says, Deborah was a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth. She was judge over Israel at that time. Now listen to this. I think this is so cool. She held court under Deborah's palm, and it's capitalized. Deborah's palm. It was a place it became known as. Deborah's palm, between Ramah and Bethel in the hills of Ephraim. And the people of Israel went to her in matters of justice. I think that is very cool. I think that's very interesting. They talk about this woman as being somebody who held court beneath a palm tree between these two towns, Ramah and Raphael. And I just misspoke. Between Ramah and Bethel in the hills of Ephraim. And she was this amazing woman. And they call her in the passage, you notice, it says, Deborah, the wife of Lapidoth. Now, there's something very interesting about that phrase, that title? Why are they talking about her as being the wife of Lapidoth? Who was she? Why was she just some guy's wife, but she was also a prophet? Now, she's introduced in the Bible with 3 pieces of information. Deborah was a woman prophet, a woman of Lapidoth, or married to Lapidoth, and she judged Israel. And her story shows that she was an impressive woman, a prophet and a judge who served God's people well. Her name Deborah, and her identification as woman of Lapidoth, or the wife of Lapidoth, might signify her brilliance in leadership. And I'm going to look at what Deborah and Lapidoth mean. So Deborah, she was a leader. She was a pursuer, or a pursuer. And yes, I thought I read that wrong for a second. The Hebrew word Deborah is widely recognized as meaning bee, like a bee, a buzzing bee. And bees are mentioned 4 times in the Old Testament. And 3 times they're mentioned metaphorically in the context of, 1, the Amorites pursuing the Israelites like bees. 2, enemy nations surrounding David the psalmist as busy bees. And 3, the Assyrians invading as agents of divine retribution. And from those verses where they list all these different uses of that word as a bee, it's apparent that the biblical authors regarded bees as dangerous. They were dangerous. They were aggressive pursuers. Bees in the land of ancient Israel are known to have been aggressive. So Richard S. Hess believes that Deborah's name, which is made up of the consonants D, B, and R in the Hebrew language, may mean lead or pursue. And if Hess is correct, then the word Deborah is fitting for Deborah the judge, as the Canaanites were aggressively pursued and destroyed by the Israelites under her leadership. And it wasn't because they were just trying to conquer them, it's because they were oppressing them. And now Deborah was also a speaker. Her name is derived from a Hebrew word that's made up of consonants DBR, but few scholars are not convinced that the word means be. A few scholars aren't convinced that the word means be at all, or lead, or pursue, as Hess proposes. And these scholars believe Deborah comes from the word debar. And debar is a common word, and while it has a range of meanings, its primary verbal and nominal meanings are speak and word, debar. Now, see what I mean about researching, getting into, look at just the linguistics, and you're already finding out facts about the name of this person. So as a prophetess, Deborah heard from God and spoke prophecies. As a judge, she arbitrated disputes and spoke judgments to the people. As a leader, she spoke encouragements as well as decisive moments that included summoning and commissioning Barak, the general of Israel's army. Moreover, Deborah and Barak sang words that are recorded in Judges 5, which we read. And Deborah was not just a woman of words, however, she backed up her words with faith-filled actions. So these are just some of the things you find out just about her name alone and the kind of person she was and why they were named. Now, remember also in the passage, she's identified as the wife of Lapidoth. We just read that passage. But what that can also mean is a woman of Lapidoth. So in particular societies, such as those of biblical era societies, women are typically identified by their relationship to a man. Sarah, the wife of Abram, etc. And usually a father or a husband. And it's commonly thought that woman of Lapidoth means Deborah was the wife of a man called Lapidoth. However, the Hebrew word Lapidoth has a feminine plural ending. And this ending was not usually used in names, meaning the word genderically was female. It's like when I talk about God's Shekinah glory came down and settled on the Ark of the Covenant. The Shekinah was it was the presence of God, but it was strictly a female gendered word. The Shekinah was a female reference of God. So did that mean goddess? We don't know. So that's a different story. But Lapidoth, woman of Lapidoth, it was a female word, Lapidoth. And furthermore, from the little information we have, it wasn't unusual for prophets and prophetesses in Israel in early Judaism to be single, unmarried. Miriam, Moses' sister, Anna, and Philip's daughters were single. Deborah may also have been single. And people in Bible times could be identified by their hometown. Just like, women could be, but people, Goliath of Gath, David of Ben Jesse, the son of Jesse of Bethlehem, so on, so on, so on. So perhaps Deborah was from a town called Lapidoth. Apart from the reference in Judges 4:4, no person or place that we know of historically has ever been called Lapidoth in the Bible. Is it a missing town? Maybe it was a little town. You go to my old horse ranch was in Ellsworth, Wisconsin. When you turned down our road, a little 2-lane blacktop, you had to go 30 miles an hour at one spot, just a street. It was just basically a street out in the middle of the country. There were 2 or 3 houses there, a post office that used to be 5 and dime. And that's all that's there. But it's called Moville. The little dip in the road there where this all is, Moville. And it's comprised of 4 houses and an old post office, which isn't even a post office anymore. Is this what Lapidoth maybe could have been a little place like Moville? So, but I don't think so. There's a third way of interpreting woman of Lapidoth. In the Hebrew, it's called Eshet Lapido or Lapidoth. Eshet is the first word. So rather than being a proper noun, Lapidot in Judges 4:4 could be the plural of lapid, which is a Hebrew word, a word that's usually translated as torches elsewhere in the Old Testament, including the book of Judges, where the word occurs in 2 fiery and fierce situations. So did Deborah have a fiery or fierce personality? Does Eshet Lapidot mean fiery lady, woman of the flames? Lapid can also refer to lightning flashes. This has been a few scholars and rabbis to suggest that Deborah was a woman of splendors. So, whatever the precise meaning of Eshet Lapidot, Deborah was a splendid woman. And we don't use that word as much anymore. That word splendid meant something much more magnificent than it means now. And it was used like amazing and deeply, almost spiritually amazing, paranormally amazing, things like that. So we see this in the song recorded in Judges 5 that we read, where Deborah is described as the matriarch, a mother in Israel who had the support of the princes of Israel. And there's not one negative word said against Deborah. She was a formidable woman, a blessing for Israel, who prospered under her leadership and was much appreciated by her people. And so Deborah continues to be a shining example of a strong, fierce woman whom God used to lead to rescue his people. Her brilliant words, as well as her actions, continue to bless and encourage. May those who love you, she's speaking to God, shine like the rising sun at its brightness, said Deborah. May those who love you shine like the rising sun at its brightness. That's in Judges 5:31. But Lapidoth means, there was one interpretation I saw of this that meant Well, they kind of derived maybe that was her occupation. She was a lighter of, or a maker and lighter of wicks for the lanterns in the tabernacle, the pre-temple tent, the tabernacle of the covenant, where the Ark of the Covenant dwelt. And but that pretty much gets put away. It's just speculative because of the word lapidoth or lapido, and lapid, which meant fire and fiery and flames. So they thought maybe she was a maker of wicks. She was the Eshet Lapidoth. And but I don't think that's it. I think it means exactly what it says here. In the King James Bible, it calls her the wife of Lapidoth. And that's because mostly these patriarchal societies didn't allow women to hold titles like prophetess and leader and king and so on and judge. And so this is the way in after years that they looked back on it and said, oh, we got to cover that up a little bit, soften that down. So they called her the wife of Lapidoth from Eshet Lapido. When in reality, what that meant was she was a fiery woman, a woman of flames, a woman of fire, a woman of passion, a woman of strength. The Hebrew text of Judges is something worth looking at. I could read it to you, but you're not going to. I can read it a little bit. I can't pronounce it. But Judges 14:8 is the only verse in the Hebrew Bible where actual bees, a swarm of bees to be precise, are mentioned. And some scholars highlight a sense of order in the word Deborah, and they connect it with bees. James Strong, in his concordances, in his writings about the Bible, has suggested that Debar, in the sense of orderly motion, is associated with the bees' orderly movements or systematic instincts. And in keeping with this sense, the Hebrew lexicon by Brown Driver Briggs points out that the Hebrew swarm of bees may be in this orderly line as led by their queen. This is just one of the notes on this passage that's worth looking at, but I don't think that it's talking about bee. And so there's more here. The feminine plural ending of the word Labadoth, used on a personal name, though rare, is attested. Labadoth it was professor of Jewish studies, Jack Swasson, and Hebrew Bible at Vanderbilt University School before retirement. He translates Eshet Lapidot as wielder of flames. Wielder of flames. He also speculates that fire may have been used in her art of prophecy. If you looked at the graphic that I did up for tonight's show, you'll see her with flames behind her. The woman of fire used in her prophecies. And that's another thing, too, that is much like some of the other cultures of the day, is that when she prophesied, the people went to her for prophecies. They went to her because she knew the mind of God and could speak the mind of God. And she used fire in her ritualistic prophecies. It's like the Urim and the Thurim, which we've talked about at other times. You don't know exactly what these were, other than they were little stones that the priests in the temple period would use the Urim and the Thurim. They were stones that they would cast to get God's mind on something. And it would be like casting lots or casting chicken bones and stirring blood into them and reading them. It's the Urim and the Thurim were. Just a little different way of doing the same thing. So, here's a little section from the historian Josephus, first century Jewish historian. He wrote the Antiquities, written around 93 AD, where he mentions Deborah and Barak in the meanings of their names. He said this, Josephus said, "So they continued to that hardship for 20 years, as not good enough of themselves to grow wise by their misfortunes. God was willing and also hereby the more to subdue their obstinacy and ingratitude toward himself. So when at length they were become penitent, then there were and were so close as to learn that their calamities arose from their contempt of the laws, they besought Deborah, a certain prophetess among them, which name in the Hebrew tongue, signifies a bee," says Josephus, "to pray to God to take pity on them and not to overlook them, now that they are ruined by the Canaanites. So God granted them deliverance and chose them a general, Barak, one that was of the tribe of Josephus." That's from the Antiquities of the Jews. Deborah was an Eshet Lapidat, a fiery or splendid woman. Just neat stuff. There's so many interesting things here about this person. These are people I would love to have met these people and gotten to know them. Who are they? What were they really like? So I've got a huge dissertation in front of me on Deborah Disclosed, the wife of Lapidat, or fiery lady. It's a critical exploration of the translation of Eshet Lapidat in Judges 4. Deborah Disclosed, wife of Lapidat, or fiery lady. And through stories, the nation of Israel found their identity as a people of God. Their stories in narrative form have life-giving qualities which allowed the communities to adjust to new and challenging situations. The Israelites, who in the beginning belonged to different tribes of Israel, are of Jacob, the children of Jacob, they were able to establish their identity, their dignity, their purpose as a people and a nation through storytelling. And one of the narratives in the Hebrew Bible that managed to survive because of its life-giving qualities and adaptable elements is the book of Judges. And in particular, this narrative that we read of Deborah. Deborah is one misinterpreted lady in the Hebrew Bible, although her story is told twice in the book of Judges, a narrative in chapter 4 and then the song that we read in chapter 5. And in most English translations of Judges 4, verse 4, Deborah is introduced as a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, and was judging Israel. And so it's surprising that most English translations don't have a footnote that represents the other meanings of the word. And it seems that for translators, Lapidoth is definitely a name of a male character, and they have assumed that Deborah is his wife. For most translators, they interpret Lapidoth as a male character. And so to study Lapidoth philologically would be quite weak, since Lapidoth is mentioned only once in the entire Hebrew Bible. And furthermore, according to Richard Hess, tracing the roots of Lapidoth in West Semitic personal name has no attestation, be it in the present form or morphologically. Lapidoth's customary Hebrew meaning is torches. However, there's another usage of Lapidoth, and this is evident in Exodus 20:18, wherein Lapidoth is understood as lightning, not a torch or a flame, but lightning. Lapidoth as lightning could suggest a cultic or religious significance. Thus, not a personal name is applied in Judges 4:4 and to Deborah. And so for this reason, Lapidoth is a personal name, is in deep question. And so on one hand, for Tikva, Freimer Kenziki, Lapidoth seems to lack the standard patrimony, son of, to confirm that Lapidoth is a name of a male. And an example is in 2 Kings. You find prophetess Huldah, the wife of Shalom, son of Tikva, son of Haras. And in this case, Huldah's husband was identified as son of Tikva, thus establishing that Shalom is a person and a personal name. And Judges 5 considers Deborah as mother in Israel, they called her. So to interpret this title in a biological sense would probably be a factor in influencing the translation of Eshet Lapidat as wife instead of lady or woman, which is the primary meaning of Eshet. So how should we understand Deborah as mother? And in fact, she is indeed a wife. And so it's for this reason that the writer revisits Deborah and attempts to elucidate her identity and her role. And so this is, as far as I'm concerned, very interesting stuff. And it leaves us asking the question, Deborah, who are you really? And I'm going to skip a lot because there's a lot of material I have here on the exposition of Deborah and Barak, God and words. Exposition of Heber, Sisera, his chariots and his troops. Deborah and Barak, God in action. Socio-rhetorical dimensions of Judges 4, exposing Deborah. Her locations. She's at the palm tree between Ramah and Bethel on the mountain of Ephraim. While in Judges 4:10, Deborah is in Kadesh Naphtali with Barak. And then she's on Mount Tabor, where she's announced the day of victory. So her actions, we could go into all of her speeches, we could go into her socio-rhetoric disclosures. And so there's all this information about her. I don't even know where to leave off because we're done. Deborah is the fiery lady. Let's leave it at that. What could have triggered that translation as wife instead of considering her a lady or a woman, which is primarily the meaning of Eshet, is an earlier tradition, was written on a later date. Deborah was considered the mother of Israel at this time. And she is also the woman who is this amazing, fiery woman of fire, woman of flames, woman of lightning. Now, all of those of you listening on radio, guess what? We got to go. But everybody else, stick around. We'll stick around for a little bit for the captain's cabin. Live long and prosper, all of you in Radio Land.
Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid Radio Program, a Scotty Roberts Productions broadcast.
Hey, folks, welcome to the captain's cabin. Arr. It's a short little, for those of you who haven't been here before, this is just a little bit of an after show. Sometimes we'll go a few minutes, sometimes we'll go a couple of hours. So it all depends on the topic and who all is here. And so I want to say hello to everybody who was over in the chat room chatting tonight. If you're still here, thanks for being here. Barbie D was here. I saw Josh Kemp. I thought I saw Uncle Dave for a minute or two there. And who else did I see? Well, that was just me. We're still small. We still have a small following that we're building up. We don't have quite the following we had on YouTube. So those of you who are here are enjoying members-only privileges to hear the show live and to join in our chat. And I appreciate the fact that you're here and that you'd spend your time and a few dollars of your money to be here with us. So I hope it's worth it to you. And also, as I've said, we're going to add more things to this stream. I've just been in the thick of being super busy and haven't been able to do a lot of the extras yet. As I said, part of the reason for charging and part of the reason for building this platform and taking in revenue is so we can do more, so we can spend our time doing more time doing the radio show and some of the video things that we're going to be planning and all the other extras that are going to be here. So once we get to that place, we'll have reached it. While we're building to that place, I'm still doing a lot of work on burning it at both ends to make sure we get this broadcast done. And so I also keep the lights on at home and keep this radio show going. So I appreciate everybody who's here and everybody who gives of themselves for this show. And it's just a little bit. You can tell your friends it's the cost of a cup of coffee. It's about $4 a month. Others of you that are here have given more than that, and I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. So hopefully we can get this built up, and I'm doing everything I can to get the word out there. And but on days when I get busy with my paying job, it's kind of hard to devote much time. So I've had about a week where I've been a little bogged down. I'm working on those Bible cards. I'm working on a couple of projects for other people, some book covers, things like that, everything. I go from being very quiet in my business for a week or two to all of a sudden it hits and you've got more work than you can handle at one time, which I'm okay with that. It's kind of a nice problem to have. So if any of you have that problem, that's the problem I've been in this week. So hopefully we'll see this thing grow over the next couple of months and we'll have some really exciting new things going on over on the Patreon channel. And also, we're going to do Robertson will be live over on YouTube, not on the Patreon. And Sunday mornings will be live over on YouTube. And one of these days soon, it might be this coming Friday, we might do an open to the general public show here at Patreon so people can see how it works. I didn't want to do that till I had the new chat room incorporated into the show. But we'll invite everybody in to come in and take a look, and maybe we can draw some people into wanting to support this channel. So there you go. That's all I got. And the kind of stuff you saw tonight that you've seen over the shows we've done over the last 2 weeks is the kind of fare that we're always going to do on this show. I would love to go back to doing this show every day, 2 hours a day, maybe even 3. And by every day, I mean 5 days a week. If that were my full-time job, I can tell you what, that's what I'd be doing. But we'll get to that point. That's what we're working on. So having said all that, I think we're going to wrap it up. I don't see anybody coming in or calling in. And but that's okay. That's to be expected at this stage in this. We're rebuilding from scratch to get to a place where we have thousands of listeners again. So all of you who are here, thank you very much for being here. You don't know how much it means to me that you're here, that you're a patron to this page. It means a lot to me that you'd throw a few dollars here every month. It means more than you can know. I appreciate that. And so I appreciate your time and all that you do and all you mean to me. And so for all of you who've been here, I just want to tell you, you have a good night. We'll see you next time, which will be Friday. And until then, live long and prosper.